Okay, so if you can go to Twitter, go to my Twitter, Rob. Just a few days ago, we saw this. New York Times. Biden allows Ukraine to strike Russia with long-range U.S. missiles. With 2 months left in office, President, for the first time, authorized Ukrainian military to use the system known as the ATACMS to defend its forces in the Kursk region of Russia. This is when? This is 17th. Today is what? 19th, 2 days ago. Go to New York Times 33 minutes ago. Watch this, folks. Ukraine fired U.S.-made missiles into Russia for the first time, officials say. The attack came just days after Biden gave Ukraine permission to use the weapon to strike targets inside Russia. Now, Zelensky comes out and says, the Ukraine-Russia war ends faster with Trump. Rob, if you got the clip, play this clip. For him to be, well, I think Trump's going to do something about it. If this is not this one, Rob, it's is that the clip that you have? Or?
I do. It's Donald Trump explaining the escalation between Ukraine and Russia.
Okay, go ahead and play. I think this thing got like 60 million views. Go ahead and play it.
We have never been closer to World War III than we are today under Joe Biden. A global conflict between nuclear-armed powers would mean death and destruction.
When is this, Rob? This is yesterday?
Unmatched in human history. It would be nuclear Armageddon. Nothing is more important than avoiding that nightmare.
How long is this, Rob?
We will avoid it.
About 6
minutes.
Need
okay, so you can pause it right here. Go to a clip, Rob, of... Anyways, and this story that I'm saying is the fact that Zelensky is saying it's going to end faster with Trumpy, and then he's going to end the conflict. This is a Forbes story that Zelensky is talking about. It was written all over the place. But Putin in October or September made a very clear comment that if you allow these guys to use these weapons against us, we'll be willing to resort to nuclear. Like, we're willing to go nuclear. Putin is saying this. By the way, we're in it right now, live, while we're doing a podcast. This is going on. So, somewhere in Russia, Kremlin, wherever it is, Putin is sitting with his handlers and his people saying, what are we doing next? Will, what do you think happens here?
So I think Biden is playing with fire, but it might not be the raging inferno we're afraid of just yet. Today on the Will Cain Show, I will have Eric Prince on. I spoke to Eric recently and asked him about this. Eric Prince is the former founder of Blackwater, incredibly intelligent when it comes to global affairs and warfare. I asked him also about the fact that North Korea is devoting 100,000 soldiers to Russia as well. Here's Eric's response to those two things. That's fodder. North Korea devoting soldiers to Russia is basically human fodder on the front lines in Ukraine. Secondarily, he said these missiles that are being used are not top-of-the-line stuff. It's not the muscle the United States could be allowing the Ukraine to fire into Russia. So maybe perhaps not the inferno that we're afraid of, but still playing with fire. Biden and the geopolitical establishment in Europe and the military-industrial complex here has a hard-on for Ukraine. They just simply do. And this is one of the biggest reasons the American public wanted to bring in Donald Trump. I have full faith that the negotiator, the strong man, the clear leader that is Donald Trump will be able to keep this from metastasizing into World War III. I think Putin knows it. I think Zelensky knows it. And I think we're headed towards a peace deal, hopefully even before Donald Trump takes office, because as Tom pointed out earlier, the dominoes are falling. The world sees the next step for the United States, and people are from Lunchables to Russia. They're getting the world in order.
So I know what Eric says, the fact that, hey, these are not the best missiles. We're not using our best, all this other stuff. Go optics. Your name is Putin. There's power plays going around the world. You have to seem strong in front of your people. 2 days ago, Biden's giving permission. 2 days later, boom. The headline says, those missiles have been fired.
And that's why he's playing with fire.
That's the point. So Putin doesn't care if it's a 1990, the highest, latest 2024 that they just build with the highest technology, whatever. Putin doesn't. All he cares is...
Hey, everyone. Welcome back. Ready for another deep dive?
Oh, absolutely. Always ready to dig in.
Great. So today, things could get, well, a little heated.
How so?
Well, we're looking at the situation in Ukraine.
Right. Always a lot to unpack there. What specifically are we diving into?
We found this YouTube video. Title is pretty dramatic. Biden is playing with fire. Putin's nuclear warning as Ukraine uses U.S. missiles against Russia.
Wow. Okay. Straight to the point, huh? So lots to talk about, I imagine.
Definitely. Seems like everyone's got an opinion on what's happening over there, and this video has a bunch of them.
Yeah, that's the thing with these sorts of videos, right? Lots of voices, but sometimes it's hard to sort through it all.
That's where we come in, right? Try to make sense of things, add some context.
You got it. So what's the big headline? What's got everyone so fired up?
Well, the big news is that Biden gave Ukraine the green light to use these ATACMS missiles.
And I'm guessing they didn't just sit on them.
Nope. Reports are saying they've already fired some into Russia.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's significant.
To say the least.
So before we go any further, maybe quick explainer for folks who aren't totally up to speed on their military hardware.
Definitely. Can you give us the rundown on these ITAC-CMS missiles? What are they, and why is everyone making such a big deal about them?
Sure. So ATAC-CMS, that stands for Army Tactical Missile System. It's basically a surface-to-surface missile. Pretty powerful.
Okay. And what makes them different from, other missiles?
Range, mainly. These things can hit targets something like 190 miles away.
Wow, that's a pretty good distance.
It is. And that's why the U.S. has been hesitant to give them to Ukraine up to now.
Right, because suddenly you're not just talking about defending Ukrainian territory, you're talking about...
hitting targets inside Russia itself.
Yeah, it changes the game a bit, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Up until this point, the U.S. has been, trying to walk this fine line. Support Ukraine, but not provoke Russia too much.
And giving them these ETT-CMS.
That's definitely a step over that line. Big signal, Shows they're willing to take a bigger risk.
And the timing of it all is interesting, too.
Right. Just a couple of months before a new president takes office. Adds a whole other layer to this, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's not just the missiles themselves, it's the message they send. And speaking of messages, this video, it really plays up Putin's past statements, about using all means to defend Russia.
Ah, yes, those statements. Chilling stuff. I mean, he's not exactly being subtle, is he?
Nope, not at all. And now with Ukraine firing missiles into Russia.
Well, it's definitely raising the stakes. But we should be clear, those statements, he made them back in September and October.
Right, so before the ATAS-CMS were even on the table.
Exactly. But his point was pretty clear. Russia annexes those 4 regions in Ukraine, and he's drawing a line in the sand, saying, don't mess with this.
So classic Putin, kind of playing chicken with the West, seeing who blinks first. But seriously, do you think he'd actually, use nuclear weapons? That seems crazy, even for him.
Well, it's a dangerous game, that's for sure. He wants to look strong, wants to keep NATO out of it. And nukes. Yeah, they're the ultimate deterrent.
I mean, it would be catastrophic, obviously, not just for Ukraine and Russia, but for everyone.
Absolutely. A global disaster. But that doesn't mean we can just ignore his warnings. We got to take him seriously. Analyze what he's saying, what he's doing, try to figure out his next move.
Feels like we're trying to read the mind of a poker player with, the highest possible stakes, Nerve-wracking.
Definitely a high-pressure situation. Now, this video also includes a comment from Zelensky that I found really interesting. He said the war would end faster if Trump was still president. What do you make of that?
Yeah, that caught my attention, too. What's he trying to do there?
It's tough to say for sure. I mean, you got to remember where he's coming from, right? Leading a country that's under attack, so he's going to be looking for any advantage he can get.
Right, so maybe he's just trying to play politics, influence the U.S. election.
Could be. Or maybe he genuinely believes that Trump would be more willing to negotiate with Putin, even if it meant, making concessions.
Who knows? Lots of intrigue there. Makes you wonder what's happening behind the scenes, what kind of conversations are going on that we don't even know about.
Oh, absolutely. International relations, it's all a big game. Lots of moves happening under the surface. Speaking of different perspectives, this video also features Eric Prince.
Blackwater guy, right?
Yeah, the founder. And let me tell you, he had some pretty strong opinions.
Oh, yeah, he didn't hold back. Called the North Korean troops that are supposedly fighting in Ukraine human fodder.
Right, and he said that those ATAT-TMS missiles, they're not even the most advanced ones the U.S. has.
And then there's his whole take on Biden, saying he's playing with fire, but maybe not, like a full-blown inferno.
Intense stuff. But, it's important to remember where he's coming from. Former Navy SEAL, background in private military operations, so his worldview is going to be shaped by that.
Fair point. So, how much weight should we give his analysis? I mean, what evidence is there to back up his claims about those North Korean troops or the effectiveness of the ATAC-CMS? And what about his assessment of Biden, given, his own background and potential biases?
So many questions. And those questions, they really get to the heart of what makes this whole situation so tricky. So much information flying around, some of it reliable, some of it not. And it's easy to get swept up in the fear and speculation.
Yeah, I can see that. So how do we navigate all of that?
Well, that's why we do these deep dives, right? It's about developing those critical thinking skills, learning how to evaluate sources, spot potential biases, and make judgments based on the best information we have.
Not just blindly accepting everything we hear.
Right. We got to be active participants in this whole process of making sense of the world.
I like that. Being active, engaged. So before we get into the next part of this video where they start making some pretty wild predictions, I want to pause for a sec.
Good idea. Let things sink in a bit.
Yeah, exactly. And for our listeners out there, I'm curious, what are your first impressions of all this ATAC-CMS situation, Putin's warnings, the whole deal? Take a moment to think about it before we continue.
What's interesting is we're looking at this whole thing. It's really important to think about the history.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Can't just ignore that.
Yeah.
What do you think are like the key historical things that we got to keep in mind when we're trying to figure out Putin and what he's doing in Ukraine?
Oh, the big one, right. The collapse of the Soviet Union.
Right.
Huge. And for a lot of Russians, Putin included, that was traumatic.
Yeah.
Humiliating even. Like they lost their place on the world stage.
And so now he's trying to get it back, right?
Exactly. Trying to make Russia a major power again. And Ukraine, well, that's not just some random country to him.
It is.
Historically, culturally, it's all tied up with Russia. Putin even talks about, denazifying Ukraine, which most people see as a bogus excuse. But it plays into this whole narrative that's really powerful in Russia. World War II, the fight against the Nazis. It's a deep part of their national identity.
Ah, so he's using that, tapping into those emotions to justify what he's doing?
Exactly. Rallying the people around a common enemy,
Wow, it's all so layered, isn't it?
It is. And that's why understanding those historical narratives is so crucial. Helps us see things from different angles.
Totally. So back to this video. They talk about how Russia might feel they have to make some kind of statement strike, to show they're strong and stop things from escalating further. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a real possibility. The thinking is Putin might feel like he's been backed into a corner. Needs to do something drastic to save face, project strength.
Right, but what would that even look like? And would it actually achieve anything besides, causing more suffering?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? What's the strategic goal? Would it really benefit Russia in the long run? Or would it just make things worse?
It's like, how far is he willing to go? And what happens to him, at home, internationally, if he takes things that far?
Right. It's a huge gamble. A statement strike could easily backfire. Make Russia even more isolated, maybe even drag NATO into the conflict. And that's the last thing he wants.
So it's a tightrope walk, any misstep, and...
Things could spiral out of control really fast. This is where things get really dangerous.
So basically what you're saying is don't underestimate Putin, but also don't assume he's going to act rationally.
Exactly. The situation is just too volatile. Now, there was another interesting tidbit in this video. Something about Trump may be already talking to Putin and Zelensky.
Oh, yeah, like back-channel negotiations, trying to work out a peace deal. Do you think there's any truth to that?
It's possible, sure. These kinds of informal talks, they happen all the time. Sometimes they're more effective than official channels, especially when things are this sensitive.
Right, but even if they are talking, can you actually see them coming to an agreement? There's so much to untangle.
Exactly. Territorial claims, security guarantees, what happens to Crimea, the overall political climate. It's a mess.
It's like trying to solve one of those super complicated Rubik's Cubes.
And someone keeps shaking the table while you're doing it.
Huh. Yeah, that's about right. And even if they did manage to reach some kind of agreement, would it actually stick?
Right. Would it actually address the root causes of the conflict? Or would it just be a temporary fix, kicking the can down the road?
Lots to think about there. And there's this whole other aspect of this conflict that we've barely touched on, but it's something I've been thinking about a lot.
Oh. What's that?
Artificial intelligence.
Ah, right. The AI elephant in the room, as they say.
Exactly. Well, I've been talking about human decisions, historical narratives, geopolitical strategy. But what happens when you add AI into the mix? Things get even more complicated, right?
Absolutely. I mean, we're already seeing AI being used in war, drones, surveillance, all that. But what happens when it takes on an even bigger role? When it's making life or death decisions on the battlefield?
That's a little scary, isn't it?
It's a question that keeps a lot of people up at night. AI has the potential to totally change how wars are fought, make them more efficient, more precise, but also more unpredictable, maybe even more destructive.
It's like opening a Pandora's box, unleashing something we might not be able to control.
That's a real concern. And that's why it's so important to talk about this stuff now. The ethical implications, the strategic consequences. We need to figure out some rules, some safeguards before it's too late.
Be proactive, not reactive.
Exactly. Can't just wait for AI to take over the battlefield and then try to figure things out. The stakes are just too high.
So much to think about.
Yeah.
And for you listening, what's going through your mind? Have you considered this whole AI angle? Does it make you feel hopeful, anxious, maybe a little of both? Take a moment to ponder that before we move on.
It's mind-blowing.
Right. AI in warfare, what does that even mean for the future?
Yeah, it's a huge question mark.
Yeah.
And it kind of brings us back to something we were talking about before, about human judgment and all that.
Yeah. Oh, right. Because with all this technology, it's easy to think AI's got all the answers.
Right. Like it's a magic solution.
Yeah.
But we got to remember, AI is a tool, just like any other tool.
Yeah.
It can be used for good or bad. It's up to us, the humans, to make sure it's used the right way.
We can't just let algorithms make all the decisions, especially when it comes to war.
Exactly. So how do we manage that? How do we use AI without losing sight of our own values, our own judgment?
Yeah, how do we strike that balance?
Well, it starts with education, I think. We got to understand how AI works, its limitations, what it can and can't do, and where it might go wrong. Only then can we make smart decisions about how to use it.
So we can't just be passive users, right? We got to be involved, informed.
Absolutely. We got to ask the tough questions, demand transparency, and hold those who are developing and using AI accountable.
That's a good point. And it's not just about AI and war, it's about everything, right? All the ways technology is changing our lives.
Totally. We need to be engaged citizens, informed decision makers, critical thinkers. The future is not something that just happens to us. It's something we shape.
So bringing it back to Ukraine, do you think there's any hope for peace at this point? Like, is a negotiated settlement even realistic?
It's hard to say. It's such a complicated situation, so many different interests, so much bad blood. But even in the darkest of times, there's always got to be hope.
Hope for what? That diplomacy will work, that people will come to their senses.
Yeah, that. But also hope that each of us can do our part to build a more peaceful future. It starts with empathy, trying to understand different perspectives.
That's a great message. And it's something we've tried to do in this deep dive, right? Explore the different facets of the war in Ukraine.
Absolutely. It's been a tough conversation, for sure, but really important. And for our listeners, I hope you've come away with a better understanding of what's at stake, and maybe even a renewed appreciation for critical thinking and open dialogue.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So thanks for joining us on this journey. We've covered a lot, from the technical stuff about missiles to the historical background to this whole mind-bending AI question. It's a lot to digest.
It has been quite the journey, hasn't it?
It has. And for everyone listening, remember, this isn't the end of the conversation. Keep asking questions, keep learning, keep engaging with the world around you. It's through informed action that we make the world a better place, more peaceful, more just. So until next time, keep those minds sharp and stay curious.